The toy store in Brooklyn was alive with holiday chaos. Parents scrambling for last-minute gifts, children shrieking with excitement, Christmas music blending into the hum of a packed checkout line. Shelves were half empty as desperate shoppers grabbed whatever was left, determined to make this Christmas perfect for their kids. Mike Tyson walked in unnoticed, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans. No cameras, no security. Just a father out picking gifts. He had nearly passed through the action figure aisle when something made him stop cold. A little boy stood frozen in front of the shelves, gripping a boxed action figure in his tiny hands. He wasn't bouncing with excitement like the other kids. Instead, his fingers clutched the box so tightly, it was as if he were trying to memorize the feeling before letting go. Behind him, his mother shifted uncomfortably, her face a mix of exhaustion and silent sorrow. She knelt beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't, sweetheart," she said with a forced smile. "Maybe next year." The boy swallowed hard, nodded, and without a word, slowly placed the toy back. Mike's chest tightened. He saw it in the boy's eyes, the quiet heartbreak, the resignation. He had been that kid once. He knew that feeling. As the boy turned away, shoulders slightly hunched, something inside Mike snapped. This Christmas wasn't ending like this. Not if he could help it. Mike Tyson stood motionless, his fists unconsciously tightening at his sides. He had taken hits from the hardest punchers in the world, but nothing had ever landed quite like this. The sight of a boy forcing himself to accept disappointment. The kid didn't beg. He didn't whine. He simply nodded, swallowed the lump in his throat, and turned away. It was the kind of reaction that came from experience, from understanding, even at such a young age, that life didn't always say yes. His mother walked beside him, her grip tightening on her purse, her head slightly bowed as if trying to make herself smaller, to disappear among the holiday rush. She had done this before, choosing between rent, groceries, and the tiny joys her child deserved. And tonight, once again, necessity had won over happiness. Mike knew that struggle. He had lived it. He had been that little boy once, standing in a store just like this, staring at something he wanted but knowing better than to ask. He knew what it felt like to swallow disappointment, to push down the ache and pretend it didn't matter. But it did matter. Mike's eyes stayed locked on the boy as he shuffled toward the front of the store, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. He stopped by the large glass window, pressing his fingers against the cold surface as he watched other kids outside, laughing, clutching shopping bags full of gifts. His mother knelt beside him, ruffling his hair. "I promise, baby. Next year will be better." The boy forced a smile. Not the kind that lit up his face, but the kind kids learned to wear when they didn't want their parents to feel worse. Mike felt something burn in his chest. No kid should have to learn that smile. Just then, a group of children rushed past, arms overflowing with toys, their laughter echoing through the store. One of them, a boy about the same age, held up an action figure, the same one the little boy had placed back on the shelf. The kid turned his head ever so slightly, his eyes flickering with something, longing maybe, or just a quiet wish. He wasn't jealous, he wasn't bitter. He had simply accepted that Christmas wasn't for kids like him. And that was the moment Mike Tyson made up his mind. This wasn't going to be just another story he walked away from. This wasn't going to be just another memory of what could have been. Not this time. Mike took a deep breath, his pulse steady. He wasn't just going to buy the kid's toy. He wasn't just going to help one family. No. He was about to change Christmas for every kid in this store. But before I tell you what happens next, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a moment so powerful, so life-changing, that it made you rethink everything? If this story is hitting you in the heart right now, comment "hope" below. And if you want to see what happens when Mike Tyson steps in, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. Because what happens next, let's just say, it'll be a Christmas these families will never forget. Stay tuned. Mike Tyson pulled his hoodie over his head a little more, his mind racing. He couldn't just stand by and let that little boy walk out of the store empty-handed. Not this time. Not when he had the power to change it. He made his way toward the front counter, moving with purpose, his broad frame weaving through the holiday chaos. The store manager, a middle-aged man with reading glasses perched low on his nose, was busy at the register, scanning the endless line of purchases. His fingers moved fast, his expression tired. Just another long holiday shift. Mike tapped the counter lightly. "Hey, boss, got a second?" The manager glanced up, annoyed at first, until his eyes registered who was standing in front of him. His breath hitched slightly, his eyes widening. Mr. Tyson, he stammered, pushing his glasses up. What can I do for you? Mike leaned in slightly, his voice low and steady. I need you to do something for me. The manager blinked. Of course. Mike glanced toward the toy section. How much would it cost to buy every single toy in this store? Silence. The manager stared at him, as if he hadn't heard right. Every toy? Mike nodded. Every last one. Nobody walks out of here empty-handed tonight. The manager's mouth opened and closed. Mr. Tyson, that's thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. Mike shrugged. You tell me the number, I'll make it happen. The manager hesitated, looking around the store. Parents counting cash. Kids holding onto wish lists, hoping their parents could say yes just once. And then his eyes landed on the little boy by the window, still standing there, watching a Christmas that didn't belong to him. Something shifted in the manager's expression. He swallowed hard and gave a small nod. Give me 5 minutes. Mike exhaled slowly. Take your time. Minutes later, the announcement rang through the store. The speakers crackled, cutting through the hum of holiday shopping. Attention, shoppers. Thanks to a very generous customer, every single toy in this store is being given away for free. If you're here looking for a gift for your child, don't worry about the price. Just pick what they love, and it's yours. Silence. Then confusion. Parents exchanged glances, unsure if they'd heard it right. A woman near the register clutched a doll to her chest, frozen in disbelief. A father who had been hesitating over a race car set suddenly straightened, his hands trembling. Then, like a spark igniting dry wood, the realization hit. A little girl gasped. Does that mean I can get the teddy bear? Her father, a man who had spent the last 5 minutes staring at a price tag, nodded slowly, his throat tight. Yes, sweetheart, you can. And just like that, the magic began. At first, there was nothing but stunned silence. Parents blinked, frozen in place, trying to process what they had just heard. Cashiers paused mid-scan, their hands hovering over the registers. The holiday chaos that had filled the store just moments ago had vanished, replaced by something else, something electric, something impossible to believe. Then, all at once, the store erupted. A mother near the entrance let out a small, choked gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. A father, who had been quietly counting cash in his wallet, suddenly pulled his son into a tight embrace before rushing back to grab the toy his boy had been eyeing. Children squealed with excitement, racing back toward the aisles, their little hands grabbing for toys they had only dared to dream of taking home. The cashiers, still processing what was happening, exchanged glances before slowly stepping back from their registers. There was nothing left for them to do. This wasn't a sale. This was a miracle. Mike Tyson stood near the back, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. He wasn't here for attention. He didn't need applause. He just wanted to see it. The moment when kids who had walked in feeling forgotten left knowing they mattered. And then his eyes landed on the little boy. He hadn't moved. He was still standing by the window, gripping the edge of his jacket in disbelief. His mother wiped at her eyes quickly as if trying to hold back tears, but the emotion was too much. The boy tugged at her sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, does that mean I can have the toy? She let out a shaky breath, nodding. Yes, baby, you can. The boy didn't run, didn't scream. He just turned, walking slowly, almost cautiously back toward the shelf where he had left his toy. His small hands reached for it, hesitated, then finally wrapped around the box, clutching it tightly to his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Mike felt something tighten in his throat. The store was alive with pure, unfiltered joy. Parents hugged their children, some openly crying as they picked out gifts they never thought they'd be able to afford. Strangers embraced, sharing in a moment they would never forget. The manager walked up beside Mike, shaking his head in disbelief. I've run this store for 10 years, he muttered, voice thick with emotion. I've never seen anything like this. Mike's gaze stayed on the boy, who was now beaming, his entire face lit up with happiness. Neither have I, Mike murmured. But this is what Christmas is supposed to feel like. The little boy stood frozen, gripping his toy as if he were afraid it might disappear. His fingers curled tightly around the edges of the box, his chest rising and falling in unsteady breaths. His mother knelt beside him, brushing a tear from her cheek before resting a gentle hand on his back. It's really yours, sweetheart, she whispered. For a moment, the boy just stared at her, as if waiting for some kind of trick, some last-minute change, that would take this away. Then, as the reality of it sank in, his face cracked into the brightest, purest smile Mike Tyson had ever seen. He hugged the toy to his chest, squeezing it so tightly it was as if he was afraid to let go. His mother exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and gratitude washing over her. All around them, the store had transformed into something magical. Parents wiped away tears, their hands trembling as they picked up gifts they never thought they'd be able to afford. Some held their children close, whispering words of love and disbelief. Others simply stood there, shaking their heads, still trying to process the miracle that had just unfolded. A man near the register clutched a boxed train set, his knuckles white around the edges. His wife covered her mouth, eyes welling up. "You don't understand," she whispered to no one in particular. "We weren't going to have anything under the tree this year. Nothing." An elderly woman in a thick winter coat cradled a stuffed bear meant for her grandson, her lip quivering as she blinked up at the ceiling, as if offering a silent prayer of thanks. The air was thick with something unspoken: gratitude, disbelief, the kind of happiness that felt too big to fit inside a toy store. Mike stood back, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. This was why he did it. Not for recognition, not for fame, just for this feeling. Then, a slight tug at his sleeve made him look down. The little boy, his toy still clutched in his hands, his face full of something Mike couldn't quite put into words. "Are you the one who did this?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike hesitated for just a second. Then, with a small smile, he crouched down so they were eye level. "Doesn't matter who did it, champ," he said gently. "What matters is, you got your toy." The boy's gaze didn't waver. "But it was you, wasn't it?" Mike didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and ruffled the boy's hair, his smile widening. "Merry Christmas, buddy." The boy stared at him for a beat longer. Then, without warning, threw his arms around Mike's neck in the tightest hug he could manage. The store erupted into cheers. Parents clapped, some still dabbing at their eyes. Employees stood frozen, watching something unfold that they would be telling their families about for years. Mike felt the boy's small arms around him, the warmth of gratitude, of something far deeper than just a thank you. And for the first time that night, even Mike had to blink back the emotion rising in his chest. Mike Tyson took one last deep breath of the cold winter air before stepping back into the store. The warmth hit him immediately, but it wasn't just from the heaters, it was from the energy. The store was alive. Parents laughing, kids hugging their new toys, employees standing off to the side, wiping their eyes in disbelief. The kind of Christmas miracle people usually only read about was happening right here. But Mike wasn't the only one who noticed. Unbeknownst to him, dozens of shoppers had pulled out their phones, capturing every moment. The announcement, the gasps, the cheers, the little boy's hug, the moment Mike stepped outside to help a stranger. By the time he reached the back of the store, the videos were already hitting social media. Mike Tyson just bought every toy in this store. This is the real spirit of Christmas. A true champ, inside and outside the ring. Within minutes, the videos were being shared across platforms: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Influencers reposted them. News outlets picked up the story. The views skyrocketed. But inside the store, none of that mattered. Because right now, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about headlines. It was about a little boy who got his dream toy. It was about a mother who didn't have to say, "maybe next year." It was about a father who could go home and tell his kids that Santa had come through for them after all. The store manager, still stunned, approached Mike with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, shaking his head. "I've been running this place for years, and I've never seen anything like this." Mike gave him a small nod. "Just make sure they remember this night," he said simply. "Make sure they remember that sometimes good things happen when you least expect them." As he turned to leave, a ripple of realization moved through the crowd. The parents, the employees, even the kids. One by one, they began to recognize the man who had just changed their Christmas. It started with a murmur, then gasps, then applause. Loud, thunderous, heartfelt. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world, the man who had once been feared in the ring, now stood in the middle of a toy store. Not as a fighter, but as a hero. And then, from the side, a small voice spoke up. "Mom," the little boy whispered, still holding his toy. "That's Mike Tyson, isn't it?" His mother turned, her breath catching as she finally saw him for who he was. Tears welled in her eyes. And before Mike could slip away unnoticed, the little boy did something no one expected. He walked straight up to him, toy still clutched tightly in his arms, and looked him in the eye. "You didn't have to do this," the boy said softly. Mike knelt down so they were eye level. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "I did." The boy hesitated for just a second. Then, in the simplest and purest act of gratitude, he held out his toy. "You can have it," he offered. "You gave it to me. I want you to have it." For the first time in a long time, Mike felt his throat tighten. He gently pushed the toy back toward the boy. "Nah, champ," he said. "That one's yours. Always was." The boy's face lit up. He turned and ran back to his mother, his joy radiating through the entire store. Mike stood up, exhaled, and nodded to the crowd. "Merry Christmas," he said. And just like that, he walked toward the exit, leaving behind a store full of people whose lives had just been changed. But this story isn't over yet. If you've made it this far, I have just one question for you. Would you do the same if you had the chance? Comment, "Yes." If this story touched your heart, and if you want to see what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, there's more to this night than you think. And the next part, it's going to leave you speechless. Mike Tyson stepped out into the cold night, the chill biting against his skin as he pulled his hoodie up a little more. The echoes of joy, the laughter of children, and the murmurs of gratitude still lingered behind him, trapped within the walls of that toy store. He had done what he came to do, but the night wasn't over yet. As he walked toward his car, his eyes drifted to the side of the parking lot. That same man, the one he had given the envelope to, was still standing there. He hadn't moved, hadn't even opened the envelope. He just held it in his shaking hands, staring at it like he couldn't believe it was real. Mike paused for a moment, watching. Finally, the man exhaled sharply and peeled back the flap of the envelope, his fingers trembling. His eyes widened as he saw the thick stack of cash inside. His breath hitched. He blinked rapidly, looking around as if expecting someone to tell him it was a mistake. Then, for the first time that night, he smiled. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, like a man who had been drowning for years and had just taken his first real breath. Mike nodded to himself and turned to leave. But before he could take a step, the man's voice stopped him. "Sir." Mike turned. The man swallowed hard. "Why?" His voice was hoarse, raw, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. "Why me?" Mike studied him for a long second. Then, with a small shrug, he said, "Because someone once did it for me." The man's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. Mike stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "I know what it's like," he said, "to feel invisible, to stand on the outside, watching the world go on without you." He gestured back to the store, to the families, to the warmth and joy still radiating from inside. "I know what it's like to not have that, to not belong." The man's lips parted slightly, his eyes shining under the dim parking lot lights. Mike took a deep breath. "But I also know what it's like when someone finally sees you, when someone finally reaches out and says, 'You matter.'" He motioned to the envelope. "That's what this is. Not charity, not pity, just a reminder." The man clenched his jaw, nodding rapidly like he was afraid to speak, because if he did, he might break. Mike gave him one last pat on the shoulder before stepping back. "Merry Christmas, man." The man let out a shaky breath, gripping the envelope tighter, and this time, when he nodded, it was different. It wasn't just gratitude, it was hope. And as Mike Tyson finally got into his car and drove off into the night, he knew, tonight he hadn't just given people gifts. He had given them something far more valuable, a reason to believe again. Mike Tyson gripped the steering wheel as he drove through the dimly lit streets of Brooklyn, the weight of the night still settling in his chest. He had come to the toy store for a simple Christmas errand, but instead, he had walked straight into a moment that had changed everything. Not just for that little boy, not just for the struggling parents, but for himself. The city lights flickered past his window, a blur of neon signs and glowing street lamps. His mind wasn't on the road, though. It was still back at the store, still hearing the cheers, the laughter, the stunned silence that had turned into something magical. And the little boy. That smile, that hug. Mike exhaled, gripping the wheel a little tighter. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, at a red light, he picked it up. A flood of notifications lit up the screen. Mike Tyson just bought every toy in a Brooklyn store. This is the Christmas story we all needed. A true champion inside and outside the ring. The video will bring you to tears. Watch now. His brows furrowed as he scrolled. Social media had exploded. The moment had been captured from every angle. The announcement over the loudspeaker, the parents breaking down in tears, the children celebrating like it was the best day of their lives. The video of the little boy hugging him had already been viewed over 1 million times. Mike shook his head, a small, almost disbelieving smile playing at his lips. He hadn't done it for the cameras. He hadn't done it for recognition. But somehow, the world had seen it anyway. As the light turned green, he kept scrolling, his chest tightening as he saw the thousands of comments. This story reminds me that kindness still exists in the world. I was crying within the first 30 seconds. We need more people like this. My family was struggling this Christmas too. Seeing this gives me hope. That last comment stuck with him. Hope. That was what tonight had really been about. Not toys, not money. Hope. The kind of hope that told people that even when life was hard, even when things seemed impossible, there were still good people in the world. As he pulled into his driveway, Mike sat in his car for a long moment, staring at the screen, the notifications still rolling in. He had spent years fighting battles in the ring, proving himself over and over. But tonight had been a different kind of fight. And for the first time in a long time, he knew this was one he had truly won.